Hi, today I'm talking with Owen Haacke. Thanks a lot for joining me on this call, by the way. And Owen is an expert when it comes to assessing the tariffs that apply to a certain product for import in the USA, and also for what I would call maybe re-engineering the way US customs see your product so that maybe a different level of tariff or maybe no tariff applies to it. And that's really a very, very timely topic. So Owen works, actually, he's a co-founder of a company called Supply Chain Shark like the fish. Hi, Owen, how are you? Can you give us like a short intro about what you do?
Hey, Renaud. Yeah, thanks for the opportunity. Yeah, so Supply Chain Shark, co-founder of Supply Chain Shark. It's really a how-to business for new importers, startups, and growing businesses when it comes to everything that they need to do to import products into the US. And it can be a very complicated process when you look at import duties, compliance requirements, also booking freight. How do you optimize that? And what we try to do is make sure that new companies get set up so they're doing everything to minimize costs, or established companies are reviewing their costs on an ongoing basis, including import duties and what they're paying to really make sure that they're cutting the costs. So that's kind of short summary of Supply Chain Shark and what we do, and just want to make it accessible really to any company so they can easily access that without having to go through too many parties.
Mm, great. Yeah, that's the kinds of services that are in great demand these days, I guess. So let's start with the basics, okay? Because some people might watch this video, listen to the podcast, and might not be familiar with some of the basic terms and concepts here. First, what is a HTS code, right? And why is it so important when we look at tariffs and import duties in general?
Yeah, the HTS code, really, it's a fascinating system that assigns a number to any product you can think of, from a piece of paper to a sports car. Every item that you can think of or fathom in your head is assigned a code. And this is a system that was developed by the World Customs Organization, I think in the 80s. And there was different systems before that to really standardize, how we are assigning a code, a numerical code to an item, and that so there's some uniformity across, different countries. So
Mhm.
this was a way, this was created to just give that kind of basics, and then every country has their own specific code up to 10 digits. So I think it's up to 6 digits. You can expect those to be a certain standard across different countries, but then they get more specific as you get down to the 10-digit level. And the real purpose of it is from the the customs, when someone's importing it, it's a tax. So we need to basically classify the items, because there could be all kinds of different computer mouse, for example. That's what I'm holding in my hand. There could be all kinds of different devices like that that are used to control a computer or a TV. It's kind of a remote control.
Mhm.
And then there needs to be a way for for the tax authority or the customs departments to understand that this mouse or this remote falls into this specific category, so that then for statistics reasons, and then also so then they can determine exactly what that import duty might be that applies to that code. So
Right.
it's a way of making sense of everything that's out there in the world, every single item, in giving it a numerical number, like a product number for an
Right.
item.
Yeah. Okay. So it's a identification system basically, and
Mhm.
not just for finished products, right? It's also for components, maybe modules of finished products, etc. Right? So that's also important to know. But we'll get to that a bit later. And so the tariffs, basically, let's say the Trump administration says, okay, it's going to be a new tariff, and we're going to target it because they're probably going to make some carve outs, right? Okay, we really need to buy these kind of things. It's not very smart to put a very high tariff. This is probably going to be some negotiations behind the scenes, right? And then what we saw in 2018 was they would say, well, whatever, like routers would have a, I don't know, for example, a 10% or 25% tariff, but then phones would be still at 0%, right? So the one thing is the HTS code. What categories of products does it apply to? And the second one is what country? And in 2018, it was very, very targeted. It was China, right?
Mm.
So in that case, it's very important to look at the country of origin, right? What again, another basic concept here. In the eyes of customs, especially in the US, what does it mean that there's a country of origin? And what happens when, well, for example, talking about routers, maybe routers are made in, I don't know, assembled in Vietnam, but then all the components come by truck from Dongguan in China, right?
Mhm.
Let's take this case. What does it mean actually for the country of origin?
Yeah, country of origin, I think right now is extremely important for companies to understand. And country of origin simply from, the simple view of it from customs is where a product is produced, manufactured, or grown. Simply, that's the origin. But there are specific rules that determine what the country of origin is, and that's when you are looking at moving products and components across borders and different countries. You can also look at the percentage of the content. Is it a certain percentage? Is it 70% of this product is made in Vietnam? There's some rules on that, and they can depend on the specific product, that you're looking at and what rule might apply to that. But essentially, it's where is the main value of this product manufactured and where is it from. That's the kind of the simple way of looking at it. And right now, understanding that country of origin of the actual final good is extremely important, because there is a lot of goods shifting around, or their claims that our products are made in Vietnam or Cambodia, where actually the main value of that is coming from China or somewhere else that has additional duties. So really important that companies keep an eye on that. And the other issue, which that I think is important for companies to understand when it comes to country of origin, is the transshipment. And we can talk about that a little bit more. But that's simply where, and I get a lot of questions from companies that say, "Hey, can I do this? Can I send a product from Vietnam to Mexico and then put a product of Mexico on it and then simply send it over to the US?" And that's not how it works. But you'd be surprised, some larger sophisticated companies, now that they're for the first time looking at their overall geographical footprint, they may assume that that's is you move a
Wow.
country from one to the other and ship it, and that's a country of origin. So
Wow.
um, yeah, and yeah, there's rules about that, and we can dive into that a little bit more about the transformation and how that works. But simply, it's where the country is actually produced, manufactured, or grown,
Hmm.
and that yeah.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so there's, as we mentioned, what kind of product is it, or component, or whatever, let's say item, and what is the country of origin, okay, in the eyes of US customs. And these two things will determine if a certain item is subject to tariffs. And there's a lot of talk everywhere about, hey, how to move things to Malaysia, to Vietnam, to Thailand, to Mexico, to etc., or even reshore it to the US. And there's not so much talk about the opportunity to actually look at the HS code of the product and say, is this really the only HS code that the US Customs would use to label this item? Maybe this item could be in this other HTS code, right? Because that's something you mentioned you're working on, and I think it's extremely interesting. Do you have maybe some examples of that?
Yeah. have some examples. Ultimately, we want to make sure that you're using the accurate HTS code. Usually there's, one or two, or if there's any kind of ambiguity, to get an official ruling from customs on that. But, what I found is a lot of companies maybe haven't reviewed their HTS codes in years, some in a decade. And HTS codes do change. It's frequently updated. Sections that may be updated or specific at the 10-digit level. Things change. Sometimes they're not valid anymore. And one of the main mistakes that I see are companies that are importing to the US, and they may rely on their manufacturer to tell them what HTS code to use. And they're not the experts on that. And the importer, if you're a US based company and you're importing, the importer is responsible for making sure that they have the accurate
Of course.
HTS code. So
Yeah.
there are examples where reviewing that can absolutely be advantageous to your business. And I'll give you a couple examples. One, this was yesterday. We were reviewing a client's HTS code for one product that had the additional China duty of 25%, and it's an educational material, like a textbook that's used in a specific therapeutic use, and they were bringing it in as a blank spiral notebook, a blank register under that classification. And I don't know, originally, that was what was determined, but there's another, and that was subject to 25% duty. And there's another category that is for textbooks and educational texts that was a different classification and had a 7.5% additional duty, 0% general duty, and then the China duty. So it decreased their overall duties they had to pay by 17.5%. Right. In that
Yeah.
case, it was
Mm.
a matter of, hey, we have these products are subject to the higher duty rate. Let's review them and see if make sure they're accurate. So the first one's just to review and make sure that their codes are accurate. And sometimes the findings can be that they're into a lower category.
In this case, it's quite legit, right? We're not talking about
Yeah.
playing games here,
Yeah.
but we're talking about looking at an item that legitimately could be seen as, let's say, in its most basic form, it's a spiral-bound notebook, whatever. However, in its application and yeah, just the way it's used, in its content and everything, it's also an educational textbook. It's
Mm.
both of them at the same time, but actually the educational textbook is probably the better classification anyway, right?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
that's really what this HTS code was created for this kind of item, to
Mm.
remove it from that very general category and to move it into this more specific category. So when you have something like this, that's the better one. And of course, if that means lower tariff, I mean, oh, even better, right? But what if we have something like very general like this, where maybe there's no tariff, and then something very specific where there is a tariff? Is it okay also to move it from the more specific to the more general, or is that usually not suggested?
Yeah, and there's kind of the general rules that you go through when you're in your classification process.
Mhm.
And part of that is, going from the heading to the more specific subheading. So the more specific one in that case would be the more, accurate one to use. And there are, different rules that you can look at in that process. And sometimes when there's uncertainty, and then
Mm.
that's, the point where doing the submitting for a customs ruling and getting a real yes or no from customs is always the recommended action on that. But the more specific they are is generally the one that's going to be the correct one to use.
Right. So and there's some specific cases, as you mentioned, where it's possible to actually write to the US Customs Administration and say,
Hmm?
well, this is exactly the product, this is all the information summarized. I'm not sure if it's in this category or that category, right? If I boil it down.
Yeah,
And then they will
yeah,
post it, and actually they will make it public.
yeah.
I think I saw that web page. Yes.
Yep. Yeah, it's cross, and that's where all the customs rulings are. So one useful thing about that is if you or a company's team is looking at their classification for a specific product and they're uncertain if it should be in one classification or the other, if it's a fairly common product, someone's likely had that same question before and they've maybe already asked customs and then got a ruling on it. And if they've already done that, then it's, there's your answer. It's clear. And so that's a resource that anyone can use. It's public. It's CROSS, and you can log on US Customs rulings to get that. And if
Nice.
it's already been ruled, you can refer to that. And so that's a lot of times when there's ambiguity, or if someone says, I think it should be in this or this, I'll take a look at it. And sometimes when I look at it and say, hey, well, this might be either, or there could be a case for both. Sometimes based off the function of the product. Some items are classified, but by what market you're marketing to. If it's a children's product, it might be in a different class. So there's some nuances beyond just the, is it a mouse or is it an apple? Sometimes the use is also factored into that. And when you're in those kind of considerations and you're like, I'm not sure, looking at cross those rulings can be extremely helpful. And the situation that I do see more often than I would like to is when I have companies that would come to us and say, we're currently at this duty rate, or I look at their codes and they say, we're not sure if this is accurate. They review it to check the accurate classification. And sometimes the answer isn't always the one that we want to hear. Instead of going from, 25% duties to 0% duties, sometimes there's cases where we review it and they're at the 7.5% duty, but the correct one is subject to the 25% duty, right? And that happens as well. And when you have that kind of situation, it's, companies need to make the decision to say, I need to make this change to be in compliance. And of course, as a customs broker, I absolutely say, make it the change to the accurate code. And companies that may, ignore that or say, hey, our supplier, and a lot of times they're like, I'm not going to listen to you, the customs broker. I'm going to listen to my manufacturer. And that's where you need to, just check, say, hey, are we using the correct classification here? And then that kind of going back to your question, when they run into those scenarios where they're paying a higher duty rate than they would like, they've kind of reviewed all their options, and they're they're already at a 20% duty rate plus the 25% China duty, and they're in the 40%. And I have some clients that are paying over 40% on like textile goods, bags, things like that, and other products. Then it's kind of gets into the more interesting part where you look at the nature of the product, the materials, and basically how can you create another product or modify your existing product to perhaps fall into another classification that would be at a lower rate. And that's what it's the kind of the product engineering or tariff engineering world, where your design team then needs to get involved to work together to see what they can do there. But you need to have a tariff consultant or a duty, someone that understands the harmonized tariff schedule to help review that and provide some options. And I do have one example there, and this was last year. We were working with a company that was importing, I think there were traps for rats to catch rats. So they were like metal rat cages or animal. I feel like it was a larger rodent that they were. But they were traps. The metal ones, I believe, were subject to a much higher duty rate. It was well over 25%, and it was traps made out of metal. And again, things change, but this was. And then we looked at them, and if they are made out of plastic material, I think the duty rate was 0, right? So it was it's a simple kind of material change. It means they might need to go to a different manufacturer, one that's making. They might have to have some upfront cost to make plastic molds and things like that. But we looked out there on the market. I think there was a ruling on it too, someone that was classifying those products, but it made sense for them long term to change that nature of the product. And I have one more example, a really good
Oh,
example
yeah.
I can share with you,
Hmm.
if you'd like. The other one that we worked on, I think it was that same client, was for traffic cones. And those are the orange cones, you see
Yep.
out used for construction. A lot of people will, truckers keep them in their car in case they have to pull over on the side of the road. Individual, a lot of people
Mm.
keep them in the car these in case they pull over on the highway.
So a lot of
Um,
different
a,
applications, right?
a
Yeah.
lot of different
Mm.
applications, and this was an interesting one because we looked and the full plastic traffic cones were at a fairly high duty rate. And again, I think it was over 25%, or maybe they had the 25% additional China duty. But if it was a folding traffic cone, that had a textile outer and it folds down small, it was in a different, it was, fell into like a textile product category. And there was already a ruling on this too. So someone had already, said,
Yeah.
is this in a different category? It's the same product. It's a traffic cone. And it ended up being a very positive outcome because instead of doing the pre-assembled plastic or rubber traffic cones that take a lot of volume in the
Sure.
container when they're sending them from overseas,
Mhm.
now they could get traffic cones and stack 10 times as many of them in there and charge a little bit more because it's a feature. So it was that they collapse, and so they ended up saving more on their freight costs, duties, and then had a competitive product. It had a competitive advantage over some of the other ones out there. But that was kind of a
Yeah.
cool scenario. So it takes some creative thinking sometimes.
Pretty smart. Yeah, pretty smart, I would say. I have related question. Okay, there's a lot of companies that say, "Oh, all this stuff is just complicated. I'm not a very big company. I'm just going to try to fly under the radar." And then they see that the packages that are declared under 800 US dollar is
Hmm.
the de minimis exemption, which might disappear, by the way, or
Hmm.
be changed significantly, but it's still in place, right? And they see that, oh, okay, like basically US Customs doesn't check these parcels, or a very, very, very tiny proportion of it. So I'm just going to ship my products in like relatively small parcels, and then I don't need to worry about all that stuff about what tariffs to pay and what to declare and so on and so forth. First, is this a legit way? Like, is it even legal? What if the product is in a category to which tariffs apply? Does that change something? How do you see that?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. And the way it's set up right now, really, for anything that's under $800, and that's the invoice value of the goods, can receive that treatment under the de minimis program, as a Section 321 entry, where it can come in duty free, with some exceptions there if it's subject to anti-dumping or countervailing duties or other special circumstances. And that's where we see that boom of the small parcels, sent from overseas directly to the consumer. And yeah, you experience this on platforms, Temu and others. You hear, use
Yeah,
this model. Amazon uses it too for shipments coming directly from the manufacturer that
oh,
are
I see.
smaller parcel, right? So it's
Yeah,
that a lot of times the manufacturer will work with a fulfillment center, third party logistics there, that's sending out the parcel directly via an express carrier, and they're
yeah.
consolidating those and sending them. They'll usually consolidate them
Mm,
and bring them over on
mm.
discounted, freight. They bundle them all and then send them
Yes,
over, and then they
right.
get them out in that model, right? So, and they get discounts because they're filling up planes, or containers, with thousands of separate orders. And that model has been around since, I think it was 2000. The Obama administration raised it from, I
Mm.
think $200 to $800, and you could ship a computer monitor. I ordered a computer monitor from China once, and it directly, and it came, it was a nice one, and it came directly under, as a de minimis entry, and it was under $800 in value. So, there's, it's it's something that the U.S. government did to reduce the workload on customs. Just
Mhm.
didn't have enough workforce. The parcel carriers, FedEx, UPS, DHL, of course, lobbied hard for that because it
Yeah, pretty good for
increased
them.
a
Yes.
significant business for them. And I mean, now it's like 4 million packages a day or something coming
It's
in that
crazy.
are, yeah, it's
Yeah.
right. It's a lot.
It,
And
you went up, up, up. Yeah.
yeah, I had some stats we were talking about it. It's like I forget what the percentages are, but the number of parcels coming in from there's like 70% of textiles coming from
Wow.
either overseas altogether or just from China. I forget the stat. Coming in through that model, and a lot of
Wow.
that's kind of through Temu and others. And I ordered some tech.
Shein.
I
Yeah.
ordered a pair of pants on Amazon, and it came from that it came like 2 weeks later, direct from China. So that they're using that model too. They're not importing in bulk. They're
Right.
not registered as an importer. They're not paying those import duties. So because of this, and there's a lot of smuggling that's going on in that, in terms of they're not being checked. They'll do some random
Mhm.
checks, and I think they'll do some screenings, but they're coming in pretty much unchecked, and they're not complying to a lot of U.S. regulations that otherwise, all the clients we work with are registered importers here, and the amount of work that they need to do to make sure that they're in compliance with to import, with the government agencies that are involved in that, and then also to sell legally on platforms, or to like Amazon has some requirements and things like that. But
Mm.
also just to import on all that documentation that's required. That if you're doing the Section 321, the de minimis under 800, that you don't need to have that documentation in there. So it leads to a lot of unsafe products coming in.
Right.
Right, and then also opportunities for smuggling. So that's where we saw the U.S. administration, in September, the Biden administration announced some potential changes there to the de minimis program. It won't scrap it all the way, but for products that are subject to the additional duties, so those are like that 7.5%, the additional 25%, like the China 301 duties, they would be now subject to have to pay that and come in as a formal entry. But it wouldn't completely get rid of the program. I have a client that's bringing in some
Mm.
products from Pakistan under that, and that may still, and again, this isn't final or anything like that, but
Right.
they may still be able to bring in stuff under that de minimis program. So there's been a lot of proposals on this too, but I foresee those changes happening there because, as you mentioned, it's been going up. That 4 million or two, forget the exact stat, coming in every day of packages. It's just you're going up and
Humongous
up.
numbers.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Right. So basically, what you're
Yeah.
saying is that for the past already, what, 2, 3 months, products that are subject to tariffs may not be sent in that de minimis manner, right? Even if you send it and it's just, I don't know, $100, you
Mm,
have to complete formal custom declarations and so on and so forth. So I'm sure a lot of people will, as you say, smuggle it, like maybe misdeclare it or something and write like on the invoice, oh,
mm.
this is not that product, is that other product, and that's it. And currently, a very small proportion are checked, so that the risk
Mm.
maybe is not very high, but in theory, it is forbidden. That's what you're saying.
And the changes haven't went into effect yet,
Oh,
in
I see.
terms of
Okay.
not yet. So it's a
Mm.
proposal, but I foresee those changes, you know, going into effect. And again, not no crystal ball here and exactly what'll happen, but it hasn't. Companies can still bring in product under 800 duty free as long as they're not subject to those special duties, as of
Mhm.
today. But we foresee those changes, happening. So, it, particularly companies that are dependent on that model should be thinking about what their next action would be to really what they'll need to do is register as an importer or find, someone that can import the product here and then pay those duties for them. And yeah, it's going to raise costs for them, but it will raise costs for, all the other businesses that are using that model as well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's the end of the double standard over time, basically. That's where we're going.
Yeah. 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 And that's where, a lot of companies that import product to the US and then they pay the duties and then they, do their fulfillment from their own warehouse, or they have a third party logistics center here. They're complaining because they say, hey, well, my competitors are selling, similar product on Temu or even Amazon, and they're not paying duties on it, but they are.
Yeah.
And they're, and so that's, that's kind of the argument, but so to some extent will level the playing field. But one of our clients that is, very familiar with the drop shipping model and was using that, they found success in that drop shipping model where their manufacturer was sending directly from overseas to the customer in the US. But he noted a lot of those businesses that are doing that, it may be the case they're not necessarily trying to build a long term.
Yes.
They're trying to make short profits, and so the changes might, you know, ruin that business, or they might just move on to a different, product. But those that want to have a more sustainable business, or, have growth or foresee future growth of that product or their brand in the US, you're registering as an importer in the US and acting as the importer record, paying import duties, bringing in inventory to the US is, long term is the more sustainable model.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Makes a lot of sense. All right, we're getting to the end of the episode here. So I want to say a big thank you to Owen Haacke from Supply Chain Shark at supplychainshark.com. Is there a place where people can find you apart from that website? If people want to reach out to you?
LinkedIn, that's the only social platform I'm on, and I've been on it, since it started. So, but feel free to send me a note on LinkedIn and add me, and I'd love to connect.
Great. So I'm just going to spell your name. So Owen and then Haacke, Haacke for people who
Correct.
search on LinkedIn. All right.
That's it.
Thank you so much, Owen, and that was a great one. Thank you.
Thanks, Renaud.